Yeah, I was talking to someone the other day, and we were doing self-inquiry, and we got to thinking. We reduced down to thinking and who's the thinker and object, subject, and seer and seen, and the question arose: what is the function of thinking? And waited in the pause, and of course we quickly got to the function of thinking is to think. It's so obvious, isn't it? You know, and we know that, don't we? That movement of identification into the doer of the thoughts, which is really what the self is, the ego self is the identification as these are my thoughts. Let's ride the roller coaster of the narrative, pro and con. And that without that, when we turn the mind around and we go the other direction, one of the first things to go is thinking, isn't it? Even if we're wholly identified as a thinker, and we're new in spiritual community, or we're beginning the practice of a tool called meditation, most people understand that the idea of meditation is that you don't think. Well, that most people's understanding of meditation is that you don't think. So, of course, now here I am, a thinker, whose only task is to not think. Yet, the experience of not thinking is death to that identification, the identity, the personality, the personhood. And so I'm caught in a loop, an impossible loop there. And the first thought is generally, and this was part of the reflection with the individual I was working with, is to review the period of silence, or it generally manifests as how to review the practice of meditation. Am I doing it well? Am I good at it? This is really common, isn't it? Or mostly the kind of negative entropy of the ego is like, I'm not doing it well, this isn't going well. I think I've heard Thomas Keating talk about it's about 9 seconds. You get about 9 seconds and then a thought arises, which is generally reviewing how well the silence is going. So this reframing of the idea of meditation has been a liberation, really. I think even when I was teaching progressive meditation to people, I was saying, because it occurred to me after 10 years of listening to monastics and Christian mystics talk about the nature of contemplation and the contemplative tradition, that it clearly wasn't about silence, but the allowing of the appearances and disappearances of whatever, and loving that, the practice and use of centering prayer as well, to kind of breathe into whatever arose, just as the Christ character did in numerous stories when he used his breath to breathe on people. I think even, now my theology could be wonky here, but I'm sure God in the book of Genesis breathed creation into existence. I could be wrong there, but it sounds nice on this recording. But I think it is something like that. So, we can see the elemental nature of breath, or air, of course. So to have the phenomena of being reconfigured, especially by the direct path of moving straight to beingness by using the body. This is the Tantric Technique, isn't it? The kind of tantric sex thing, as we first hear about it, is really tantric is to use objects in presence, and because they're objects, they're outward facing. So we use the body, we use the sensations of our feet on the floor, the buttocks on the seat, the back on the chair, the breath, the rising and falling. And it seems kind of easier, it certainly appeared easier to me at first to use outward facing objects to ground myself in the presence of the identification with the body, you know, and then to later begin to turn the mind around, to try to move inwardly with the mind, to immediately find that the mind, the idea of the mind, only couldn't go any further back, because by turning the mind inwardly, by introverting it, you're immediately struck by the witnessing light of experience. It is ever present, but the taste of it, when we find that sense of beingness, is so very ordinary. It can seem like nothing, you know, but the thinking mind that's watching this process and might be being asked questions if we're doing self-inquiry with someone is, you know, trying to rationalize nothing and express it as something using words. But it's true, isn't it, that as soon as we invert experience, there's nowhere to go, because there's nothing there, there's no object to find, to hang on to articulate. So we kind of just mumble, well, and when we really get there is when we're able to say nothing. But it also isn't nothing, is it? Because it seems to be something. Energy is quite a good word. There's, you know, if we drop right now, allow our attention to come away from our voice and drop into being, you know, notice that sense of really like a feeling that seems to be in the body, although the body is inside the feeling as a concept. That's why it's a direct path, isn't it? Because there's nowhere to go. There isn't any distance to travel. There's no requirements for membership. You don't even need to have an honest desire for membership. It just is. You know. And as we know, and as we labour, and as we restate time and time again, to start there, you know, to even be able to acknowledge that as a direct force, a direct experience, hidden in plain sight, pointed to with the use of all these words, to start there and then begin to explore outwardly once more, to reconcile the world of objects and forms, and to be present to sensation, to the senses, to touch in the body, to feeling, to be the witness and the illuminating light of thought and feeling, and all of that is to operate out of a radical, unending, circumferenceless, centerless compassion for our own experience, into which anything that comes, anything that arises, anybody that comes and anybody that goes, we have our best shot at offering that sense of presence, if we are centered in that prayer that we become. As Richard Rohr says, you know, eventually with discursive prayer, with saying prayers, it soon runs out. You know, how many times can you say Our Father and Hail Mary before it just becomes rote and we're just repeating words? And we wish that we could say them with all the earnestness that we once said them when we first discovered them. But they can become rote, as language should, because language only goes a certain distance. And we go from saying prayers to being a prayer, and offer that into the lives of those around us. That doesn't free us from the misguided, tender tyranny of the thought stream. But the first place to offer that embodied compassion is to that very thinker. Because that's the realization of, until we can love ourself, then it's really difficult to love other people, isn't it? And even worse still, if we believe we are that self, then we're loving from that as a source with a small s, and not from a source in which I am not doing it, it's being done to me.